Before we jump right into today's video, I have to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, HBO Max, for sponsoring this video. Crowd gathered around her little white casket, wrote little notes on her casket. Sorry, this is because it did ping and it went off and you got caught.
No, obviously the person who behind the cover up.
Yes. Dismembered, decapitated. Probably because you're trying to hide something and make sure certain details don't come out.
Show cans of soup were found with holes in the lids.
Hey guys, welcome back. Hope you're having a good week. It is officially fall here in California, or starting to become fall. It's starting to finally cool off, which is good. For those of you who are just brand new to the channel, stopping by for your first time, my name is Annie Elise, and welcome to my channel, 10 to Life, where we talk all things true crime. We talk about old cases, new cases, ongoing cases, controversial cases. We talk about it all. So welcome, happy to have you here. As you can see, I have a little bit of a new backdrop here. Before I was right up against this zebra wallpaper and it felt like it was just a little too aggressive. It was like zebras everywhere and looking a little crazy. So I just reconfigured a bit. So now you can see, here I am in my new home office. All right, so I have been getting a lot of messages from you guys as far as, in addition to the true crime stuff, you wanting to know a little bit about me and who I am, which thank you. I had no idea anybody was even interested in who I am. So what I decided is going forward, what we're going to do, and we are going to roll it out today, brand new, we are going to do a fun fact before every video. So that way you guys can get to know me a little bit better, some of the weird, crazy, quirky things that have happened to me in my life or are currently happening to me in my life. And just as a means to, I guess, get to know me, the person behind the camera, a little bit better. So today's fun fact is I had brain surgery when I was 16 years old. And that is true. So I was in a car accident when I was 16. I hit the windshield, flew to the back seat. All sorts of stuff happened up in here. Ultimately, they had to shave my head. They had to cut me from ear to ear. So you can see I have like a scar. When my hair is wet, you can really see it. But it goes all the way from here, boop, 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 to here. Luckily, no long-term effects except for if you think I'm a little crazy, I don't know. But no, luckily no long-term effects. But that is a fun fact about me, brain surgery and a shaved head going through high school, which was not fun. Before we jump into today's case, don't forget to hit that subscribe button below and click that notification bell so that you get notified of any upcoming live streams and new videos that get posted. And as always, please like, comment, and share this where you can. Before we jump right into today's video, I have to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, HBO Max, for sponsoring this video. And here's what the best part about this is this case is so complex that of course I can't fit all of the details into one singular video, but HBO Max just came out with a docuseries about this case. And so it includes all of the details, all of the craziness, and the investigation and the case really deepens every single episode. You think you have it figured out, and there's another mystery and curveball that gets thrown your way. I thought I had it figured out right away, and I'm telling you, I definitely didn't. But I think that's why it's so interesting, because so many people are divided right now. They don't know who's really guilty, who's really innocent, was the investigation handled properly? There's so many conflicting opinions, which makes this all the more interesting. I was watching it and I was super addicted. Like, I was rapid fire changing these episodes. I could not stop watching it. It was so addictive and highly bingeable. Bingeable a word? I don't even know. But anyways, you're going to want to watch it. And I know not everybody has HBO Max, so if you don't have it, don't even worry. Just click that link in my description box below. You can download it and watch The Murders at White House Farm, because it is crazy. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. All right, guys, I feel like I just need to get comfortable right now because we've got a lot to talk about. Today's case takes us all the way across the pond and back to August 7th, 1985. And officers arrived on the scene at White House Farm after receiving a frantic phone call regarding a domestic incident. When they arrived, they found a bloodbath and what was said to have been such a gruesome scene that it haunted the police force forever. It was an entire family slaughtered. But why? And who was this family that was targeted, and why were they targeted? And who was responsible for such a heinous crime? That's what investigators wanted to figure out immediately, because they wanted to make sure that this didn't happen to another family. The property that the police had just arrived to belonged to June and Neville Bambers, and they were a married couple who were very prominent in their community. They owned the farmhouse, they owned a London property, they owned 300 acres of land and a caravan site. They were said to have been very financially secure. June and Neville were unfortunately unable to have children of their own, and so early on in their marriage, they adopted a daughter named Sheila and a son named Jeremy, both children who were unrelated to each other, but they were both adopted by June and Neville at a very young age. And as I mentioned, June and Neville were very financially sound, so they gave these children a very good home, private education, the works. These children were so well taken care of. June unfortunately suffered from depression, and she was admitted into a psychiatric facility back in the 1950s and again in 1958, right when she had adopted Sheila. In this psychiatric facility, she was given electric shock at least 6 times. And for those of you who aren't familiar with electric shock therapy, it's a pretty intensive form of therapy, and a lot of people don't agree with it at all because it is said to quite literally, fry your brain. June was also very intensely religious, so much so that she would push these thoughts and beliefs onto her children, wanting them to adopt her same views, to where it was said to have been so impactful and such a struggle that it ended up creating pretty poor relationships with her children because she was so adamant about pushing these views on them. Sheila Jean was the oldest. She was the daughter that they had adopted, and she was born in 1957, and they adopted her when she was a baby in that same year. And Sheila was absolutely stunning. Her nickname actually, as she became a teenager, was Bambi, because she was just completely stunning, this beautiful woman. Amazing. Look at this photo. She was absolutely gorgeous. In 1974, when Sheila was just 17 years old, she discovered that she was pregnant by her boyfriend, Colin, and she had arranged to have an abortion. However, this was a big problem for her mother, June, because remember, she was very, very intensely religious. So she ended up having that abortion, and it really deteriorated the relationship that she and her mother, June, had. It ended up getting so bad that June actually would call Sheila the devil child and thought that she was some version of the devil and just didn't have any spirituality or concrete belief. It was a very tumultuous relationship. Sheila ended up marrying her boyfriend Colin just a couple of years later in 1977. Sheila and Colin became pregnant again, but Sheila miscarried in the 6th month. She also then went on to have another miscarriage in a pregnancy after that. However, just 2 years later, after 4 months of bed rest, she did deliver 2 healthy twin boys, and she named those boys Nicholas and Daniel. Now, here is where the relationship between Sheila and Colin begins to intensify and unravel a bit. Shortly after the birth of their 2 sons, Nicholas and Daniel, 5 months later, in fact, it's discovered that Colin is having an affair. And he reportedly left Sheila just 5 months after the boys were born. Are you kidding me? Your wife, who has been struggling to have a healthy to term pregnancy, has been going through so much turmoil the last few years, finally delivered healthy boys after being on bed rest for 4 months. And you start an affair, and then not on top of that, you leave her when they're just 5 months old? Are you kidding me right now? Sheila was, of course, very upset, which, hello, I can't blame her, and I'm sure anybody watching this video can't blame her. However, she began taking it to extremes. It was the night of Sheila's 21st birthday, and Colin left with another woman. And Sheila became so upset that she broke a window with her fist and had to be hospitalized. The couple officially divorced just a couple of years later in 1982, and Sheila's life began to take a pretty heavy downward spiral. She started partying a lot, she was using heavy drugs, and she was sleeping around with older men. Sheila's mental health also continued to decline, and she would have episodes where she would just bang her head against the wall, and ultimately she ended up going to seek treatment and to see a doctor. The doctor said that Sheila was in an agitated state, that she was paranoid, and that she was psychotic. She was also diagnosed with schizophrenia. And the doctor wrote this, that Sheila believed the devil had given her the power to project evil onto others, and that she could make her sons have sex and cause violence with her. She called her sons the devil's children, which is also the same phrase that June had used with Sheila, if you can remember, calling her the devil's child. Now, what's a little bit unsettling here is that the doctor also says that Sheila said she believed she was capable of murdering her sons, and that she felt she was capable of getting them to kill others. That is very alarming. She also often spoke of suicide, but the doctor said that he didn't feel as though she was an actual suicide risk. From that point on, when everything really started unraveling with her mental health and with her behavior, the boy started living with Colin, her ex-husband, most of the time. Now let's talk a little bit about Sheila's brother, Jeremy, the other adopted son of June and Neville. Jeremy was born in 1961. He was just a couple of years younger than Sheila, and he was adopted by June and Neville when he was just 6 months old. Also a baby just like Sheila was. And he had a pretty normal upbringing. He was in the private schools, he was well taken care of, but at age 9, he joined a cadet boarding school, and he was reported to have been very unhappy there because there were reports of SA, which again, if you don't know what SA is, you can either look in the comments below or research it yourself. And also unhappy because of bullying that was happening at this school. Over the next few years, Jeremy had a bit of a peppered history and criminal record. He had some break-ins here and there. He also started dabbling with smuggling heroin, just acting out and really kind of taking the wrong path. All right, my leg's falling asleep, so I gotta bring it down. So fast forward to 1985, and things start to look up for Jeremy. He ended up going and working on his adopted parents' farm, and they were paying him for this. He also had a girlfriend named Julie. He was living in a cottage nearby that Neville and June owned, and it was rent-free, so he had this house he was living in, he had a job, he had a girlfriend, and the cottage he was living in was actually just down the road from the farm. It was about a 5-minute drive or a 15-minute bike ride. His father, Neville, also gave Jeremy a car to use and gave him an 8% stake in their company. So things were looking up for Jeremy. It seemed that he had it all, and his life was taking a very different path than Sheila's, clearly. In the days leading up to this horrific discovery, on August 4th, Sheila went to the farm with her 2 boys to visit June and Neville and to spend the week with them, just vacationing, laying low, hanging out on the farm. The housekeeper had said she saw Sheila that day and that nothing struck her as unusual, that Sheila was acting normal, that everybody seemed to be happy, and that it was all in all just a great family get-together. So as Sheila was there for the week with her 2 boys, spending time with her parents, Jeremy decides to pop over as well, and he comes over on the evening of August 6th, and he arrives around 7:30 p.m. A couple of hours later, the farm secretary had phoned Neville because she had a question about something, and she says that it seemed as though she had interrupted something. She said that Neville seemed very frustrated and agitated and hung up the phone very quickly, and this was around 9:30 p.m., the night before this gruesome discovery. She goes on to say that Neville was very short with her, which he never really was, and that he just hung up the phone on her very abruptly, which he apparently had never done before, and this was very out of character for him. Shortly after this took place, a farm worker saw Jeremy leave the house and head back to his cottage around 9:30 p.m. Just a few hours later, Jeremy called the police station, and he didn't call the normal emergency line, he called the actual police department line, because you have normally your 911 line and then you have like the line of the actual station, and he called the line of the actual station. And this was just, again, a few hours later in the middle of the night, which is now what technically is August 7th. Jeremy tells police that he received a very unsettling call from his father, and that his father had called him to say Sheila went berserk with a gun, and in the middle of the call, the line went completely dead. So after making this call to police, Jeremy hangs up, he races over to the farmhouse, as do the other officers, and they wait outside for the tactical unit to arrive. The tactical unit arrives around 5 a.m. and they decide that they want to wait to enter the house until it's daylight. Police determined that all of the windows and all of the doors leading to the farmhouse were completely shut with the exception of one window on the first floor through a bedroom. Using a loudhailer, which is basically like a megaphone, like one of those big speaker things you talk through, they tried to communicate with Sheila for 2 hours from outside of the house. However, the only sound or response that they were receiving back was a dog barking. There was no conversation from Sheila, there was no screams for help or conversation from anybody else in the house. All they heard was a dog barking, and this went on for 2 hours. Jeremy told the officers that when that call abruptly ended when his father had called him, that it sounded like somebody had cut the phone or cut the call short. And when police asked Jeremy if it really did seem like Sheila's character and behavior to go berserk with a gun, he said, "I don't know, she's a real nutter," that's his word, "she's a real nutter and she's been receiving psychiatric treatment." The police then asked Jeremy why his father would have called him rather than the police, and he said that his dad was very much a man who liked to keep things quiet within the family and not really air dirty laundry out there. And this makes sense because we know that they are, a well-off family, very prominent. They have a lot of different assets, and we've seen in several different situations where people like to keep things quiet and more tight-knit within the family, especially if they don't think that something is posing necessarily a huge risk, and if it perhaps is maybe just an episode. So this didn't seem very odd to the police. Jeremy goes on to tell police that Sheila is familiar with guns and that they used to go and shoot for target practice. And he tells them that while he was at the farmhouse just a few hours earlier, he had actually loaded a rifle because he heard rabbits outside, and that he left the rifle behind, and that could possibly be the weapon that Sheila used. And Jeremy says that he left that rifle on the kitchen table, fully loaded with a box of ammunition nearby. This wasn't very odd or out of the normal because Neville did have several guns in the house. He had reportedly always been very careful in terms of cleaning them and then storing them, but they had several guns at the house that they would use for hunting or for whatever it may be. So the fact that there was reportedly a rifle left loaded on the table wasn't out of the ordinary. The police finally enter the farmhouse at 7:54 a.m. after using a sledgehammer to break down the back door. Inside, they found 5 bodies with multiple gunshot wounds. Neville's body was downstairs in the kitchen, and the rest of the bodies were upstairs. The police slowly start making their way through the house, trying to gather any evidence, figuring out what order in which the family was killed, and in total, they had counted 25 shots had been fired. They discovered a telephone that was off the hook in the kitchen, which aligns with Jeremy's story, and shell casings scattered all around. The police say there were also chairs and bar stools knocked over, there were things broken, there was a ceiling light that was broken, and it looked like there had been a massive struggle that took place in this kitchen. Neville was dressed in his pajamas, and he was lying across an overturned chair that was next to the fireplace. He had been shot 8 times in total, 6 times to the head and to the face. Based on where the shell casings were, police concluded that Neville was first shot upstairs and then that he made his way downstairs, ultimately only to be shot several times again, this time within close range, which were fatal. Police made their way upstairs and they discovered June, and they say that her body and her clothes were heavily bloodstained. She was found still wearing her nightgown with bare feet, and she was lying across the floor, but it looked as though she had been sitting up in the beginning of the attack. June was shot 7 times, and 1 time in the face between her eyes. The police continue through the house and they get to the boys' room, and they discover both 6-year-old boys in their beds, which this was once upon a time Sheila's room growing up, and they were both in their beds and had been shot. 6-year-old Daniel was shot 5 times in the back of the head, and 6-year-old Nicholas was shot 3 times. All shots at a very close range. I mean, this was gruesome. Not only to have overkill, which we know when it's a crime of passion, that's usually what we see. It's overkill. It's, you don't need all of these shots, but you're doing it because it's something emotional that's tied into it. But to go into these innocent 6-year-old boys' rooms while they're sleeping in bed, shoot them with a rifle 5 times in the back of the head and the other 3 times, it is just heartbreaking, and truly it's barbaric. Police then discover Sheila, and Sheila was on the floor of the master bedroom next to her mother. She also was barefoot and in her nightdress, and she had 2 shots under the chin. One of the shots was into her throat, and there were no signs of a struggle. Okay, now here's where I have to get comfortable again, guys. All right, hold on. Okay, so as I mentioned, when they first go into this crime scene and start discovering everything, they discover that 25 shots had been fired. Now, if the rifle was fully loaded, if the rifle that was used was fully loaded, this means that it had to have been reloaded twice during this mass killing spree. So whoever the shooter was not only emptied the entire rifle into these people's bodies and limbs and heads, but then paused, reloaded, went back at it and did it again, paused again, reloaded a 3rd time, and then go and finish the job. I mean, it is horrible. And again, the only word that comes to mind that even closely describes what this is barbaric. That is like the word of the day now with this case. Based on what was discovered at the crime scene and the evidence collected, police believed that Sheila, who was suffering from schizophrenia, went on a mass murdering spree of her family and then ultimately turned the gun on herself as a murder-suicide. And their theory was that this 28-year-old woman, who was a deranged divorcee, had first gone in and shot her 2 boys, and then went downstairs when her father went to phone for help, finished the job by shooting him, and then went and killed her mother. Shortly after killing her mother, when everybody else was already deceased, she turns the gun on herself next to her mother and lies dead on the floor. After the police gave evidence that it was in fact a murder-suicide, the bodies were all released so that they could be laid to rest. And the parents and Sheila were all cremated and the boys were buried. Now here's where our first little curveball is thrown. The investigation was very poorly conducted. The crime scene was not secured, it was not searched thoroughly, and overall it was a pretty sloppy job. Additionally, much of the evidence that was recovered wasn't properly stored, recorded, or preserved. And one of the key pieces of information with the poor mishandling of evidence that I find very interesting, and I don't even know how it's allowed or legal or if it is that just within a couple of days after going to that crime scene, the police burned the blood-stained carpet and bedding because they were trying to spare Jeremy's feelings. So they felt as though, okay, we're just gonna burn it, incinerate it, get rid of it, and it's almost out of sight, out of mind. But how is that possible? Even if you already came to your ruling that it was in fact a murder-suicide, it was Sheila who was responsible, how is it possible that you legally are able to just destroy the evidence? Literally within days. Also, officers on the scene had moved the murder weapon several times without using gloves. There were just a lot of things out of the ordinary that made it overall a pretty sloppy crime scene. And just 3 days after the brutal slaying of this family, Jeremy and the extended family were given keys to go back to the farmhouse. I mean, I know crime scenes can be cleaned up pretty quickly, and once evidence is collected and gathered, you want to tie it up as quickly as possible. But to give the keys back 3 days after the killing seems pretty quick to me. And now, like we have seen in so many cases before, when we least expect it, in comes that other curveball. And this is where things begin to get very odd. Jeremy's behavior started to turn, and it started to turn so much before and after the funerals that it started to create suspicion with his extended family that he was somehow involved. He was, of course, sobbing during the funeral services, so much so that his girlfriend had to really coddle him and hold him and give him that comfort. But then his extended family says later during the wake, he was smiling and joking, which, how could you possibly be smiling and joking? I know everybody deals with grief differently, but if you're so distraught and sobbing, especially when the cameras are around, but then later in the wake you're joking and you're smiling after your entire family was just brutally massacred, that is ding a red flag. Then, shortly after the funerals, Jeremy traveled to Amsterdam with Julie, his girlfriend, and a bunch of their friends. And the travel agent who booked this trip for him said that he and all of his friends were in very high spirits. Jeremy also then began selling his family's belongings. And I'm not just talking about clearing out the house, doing an estate sale, trying to rid yourself of any horrible memories. He started getting rid of things that were very highly suspicious, in my opinion. Jeremy's girlfriend, Julie, was offered the mother's car, which, okay, fair enough. They're not going to use this car. You know, maybe he's thinking my girlfriend's mother needs a car. Okay, that's not super weird. But I'll tell you what is weird. Jeremy tried to sell 20 nude photographs of his sister Sheila to a magazine for £20,000. That's £1,000 per photo. Why are you trying to sell naked photos of your sister who was just murdered or the murderer, I should say, to a tabloid type magazine? That seems very weird. Additionally, he also put his mother June's beloved dog to sleep. For no reason. No health issues, no sickness, nothing. Just puts the dog to sleep. In my opinion, this is definitely the behavior of somebody who is trying to tie up every loose end and has no emotional ties to what happened at all. At all. At first, Julie, Jeremy's girlfriend, was very supportive of him. And as I mentioned, at that funeral, there are photos of her where she's consoling him and holding him, and she was very much trying to be a loving and comforting girlfriend. And during an interview that she had with police just a few days after the murder, she talks about the phone call that Jeremy made to her that night. And she had said that he called her between 3 and 3:30 a.m. and saying, "There's something wrong at the farm. I just got a phone call. I have to head over there. Something's going on." She said that at the time of the call, she was half asleep. She didn't know what was wrong, so she didn't really ask too many questions or think anything of it. But then over the next few weeks, their relationship begins to unravel. Julie and Jeremy start getting into several arguments, and Julie ends up realizing that he is starting to see other women. So she unleashes hell and goes after him. And on September 7th, just a month after the gruesome murders, Julie changes her entire statement to police. And she alleges that Jeremy had planned to kill his family this entire time and that he was plotting it for several months over the last couple of years even. She says that he would often talk disparagingly of his father and saying that he was old and senile, and also of his mad mother. And he often would say to her, "I just want to get rid of them all." He complained all of the time that they were trying to ruin his life, and also that his sister Sheila had nothing to live for, and that the twins were these devil children and were highly disturbed. Just a lot of hatred towards his family. He also was very angry and vocalized often to Julie how upset he was that his parents were paying for Sheila's flat, which is an apartment, which was said to have been very expensive. And as she was talking to police and letting them know all of this, she said that as he was always giving those complaints and complaining and just whining and like, oh, poor me and my family this, my family that, she dismissed it as idle talk, thinking he's just complaining, he's just pissing and moaning about his family, he's pissed off, but nothing's actually going to materialize or come of this. Now, I don't know how much I really believe this, because in that interview with police, she also tells them how Jeremy often would talk about dosing his parents with sleeping pills and then shooting them while they were asleep, and how Sheila would make the perfect scapegoat. So, I mean, it's one thing to hear a friend, a family member, a partner complaining about their family or their relationship or whatever it may be. But it is a whole other thing when somebody is strategically calculating this gruesome situation and how they are going to get rid of these people in their life and meticulously planning it and coming up with these ideas. It's not idle talk anymore. So in my opinion, when she started hearing this, she had to have known that there was some level of truth to it, because otherwise any normal sane person would be like, whoa, 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 relax, first of all, or I'm going to tell somebody, second of all, or should be first of all. But he was meticulously planning what he envisioned as being getting rid of them all. And for her to say she just dismissed it as idle talk, give me a break. And on what planet is somebody idly talking about how they're going to dose somebody with sleeping pills, then shoot them, how they also discovered the perfect scapegoat? No. He has been planning this and plotting this, and you are just pretending that you are none the wiser. He also outlined to her exactly how he would get in, saying how he would bike ride down the road and get in through that window because it had a broken latch, and that he would escape through this other part. I mean, he had it planned out. It was not idle talk. Give me a break, you're not fooling anyone. We often see with serial killers that if they have a history of harming animals, that can be pretty indicative and a prelude to what is to come down the road. And he also had bragged to Julie, apparently, about how he had killed rats with his bare hands. I mean, that is truly disgusting. Not because the act itself of killing a rat with your bare hands is disgusting, but like killing an animal and a creature is disgusting. As Julie's talking and just spilling out her guts and telling them everything, she also says how the weekend before the murders, they were spending the weekend at his cottage, and how Jeremy dyed all of his hair black, which was very odd and out of the normal for him. Now remember, there was that phone call made that night from the farmhouse secretary to Neville, where she says he sounded like he was getting in an argument, he hung up on me abruptly, and then Jeremy left shortly after at 9:30. Well, at 9:50, Julie says that Jeremy called her, and he says, "Tonight's the night, I'm so pissed off, it's now or never." But then just a few hours later, between 3 and 3:30 a.m., he calls her and says, "Something's wrong at the farm, I have to go to the farm." But again, he just called you a few hours earlier saying, "Tonight's the night, it's now or never." Are you still dismissing it as idle talk? And then when he calls you saying something's going on at the farm, are you believing him and not questioning him? I don't believe, in my opinion, that she is innocent in all of this. Not by a long shot. And that's not to say that she was involved and she was there if this is in fact what happened and Jeremy is the one responsible. But the fact that she is trying to say that she didn't know at all what was happening or what the plan was, I'm not buying that for a second. Now here's the kicker. She tells police that she arrived to the cottage that morning shortly after the crime scene was discovered and everybody had called out this murder-suicide at the hands of Sheila. And she says that Jeremy approaches her and gives her a hug and says, I should have been an actor. That doesn't sound remorseful. That doesn't sound sad. That doesn't sound like a son or a brother who is grieving. That sounds to me like somebody who is guilty. Guilty, guilty, guilty. So then Julie tells police that later that evening, she asks Jeremy, did you do it? Was it you? And he tells her no, but he tells her that a friend of his did it. So now he's assuming the responsibility in the sense of this proud moment of, yeah, they're finally got, I should have been an actor, I did it, blah, blah. But no, my hands aren't dirty. Somebody else did it. I didn't actually do the killing myself, as though that somehow is going to absolve him from the heinous crimes that he had committed. He continues to tell her that he told this friend of him who was a plumber who had done work on the farm in the past, all the ins and outs of how to get in undetected, what to do to make the call from the landline so that when police would trace it, if that call was ever made, they would see it and there would be an alibi. And he says that he had everything planned out and that everything went according to plan except for when Neville came and fought back. And he tells Julie that his father, Neville, had become angry and tried to fight back, which angered his friend, so his friend shot him 7 times, which I think it's safe to assume his friend is him, right? I mean, we're all thinking that, aren't we? And then a new piece of information emerges, and Jeremy had told Julie, and Julie conveys this to police, that the friend placed the Bible on Sheila's chest to make it look as though she did this mass killing in an emotional religious frenzy. And when police asked Julie, okay, well, why would the friend do this? Why would he do this killing for Jeremy? She says because Jeremy paid him £2,000. As a result of Julie's statement, not only Jeremy but also the friend were arrested. However, the friend was released just a short time later after providing an actual alibi. Jeremy starts telling police that Julie is lying and that she's making this whole story up because he was seeing other women and she was mad and she was pissed off at him about it, not taking any ownership or accountability and basically just pinning it on her, being like, she's making stuff up. She's a crazy female. She's pissed that I moved on and then I'm cheating on her. Don't listen to a word that she says. He goes on to tell police how much he loves his family, he loves his sister, how there's no motive behind any of this, that it doesn't make sense. So they keep doing their investigation, but he ultimately is charged and arrested with those murders on September 29th. And after the charges are filed, the prosecution starts to outline the sequence of events of what really truly happened that fateful night when this entire family was massacred and slaughtered. They say that this all began at 9:30 that night when Jeremy left the farmhouse and went back to his cottage just a short distance down the road after having this argument with his father. And they say he returned just a few hours later to White House Farm to murder everybody. That first, Jeremy knew he had to tackle his father because he was the biggest threat. He had to take him out. And he had to handle that first before he could move forward with his plan. So he lets himself in, takes the phone off the hook, and picked up the rifle from where he had set it down on that kitchen table earlier in the evening, already fully prepared and fully loaded to take out his master plan. He creeps up the stairs as quiet as possible and works his way into the master bedroom. Lifting the rifle, Jeremy begins to shoot at his mother several shots, which jolts Neville and wakes him up to where he then starts to go after Jeremy. However, when Neville was trying to get out of bed, Jeremy was ready, and he was ready, taking aim and started shooting at his father before he could even get out of the bed to charge him. He sprays 4 bullets into his own father, 2 of them shooting him in the jaw and 2 of them shooting him in the arm. Next, he works his way down into the children's bedroom, and he shoots both of them while they lay in bed sleeping. And the prosecution says that they believe when he went into the boys' room, he only fired 1 shot into each of the boys because at that point he needed to reload his gun. So he goes back to the kitchen, starts reloading his rifle, and only gets 4 bullets or whatever they're called, cartridges, loaded before his father bravely storms down the stairs, super injured but trying to protect his family. And they say Neville heroically tried to grapple the gun from his son, but he was seriously hurt, so he instead collapses into the chair, falls to the ground, and then Jeremy takes the opportunity to overpower him and shoot him again, this time fatally killing him. Prosecutors go on to say that surprisingly, June was still alive, and although she was gravely injured, she was still alive and those shots fired had woken up Sheila. So that's why Sheila then rushes to her mother's bedroom to see what's going on. She saw her mother covered in blood and was trying to go and race to see the boys and get to their room, but before she could leave, Jeremy, her brother, was back with that reloaded rifle. He shoots his mother 4 more times, 3 to the neck, and then 1 to the forehead right between the eyes. Jeremy then turns his attention to his sister Sheila, the scapegoat for this entire thing. He forced her to then lie down next to his mother in the bed where his mother was now deceased, and he shoots her in the throat. With 6 bullets still left in the rifle, prosecutors say that then Jeremy makes his way back to the twin boys' room and he shoots the rest of the 6 bullets into their tiny sleeping bodies. Then, after the murders were done, the prosecutors say it was time for Jeremy to set his chilling plan into motion to frame his sister for this horrific crime. So when he goes back to the bedroom to lay the gun down, to plant the scene, to make it all look like that, he sees that Sheila is still alive. She was shot that one time in the throat, but she is still alive. I mean, that is a testament, I feel, in itself that these people, his family members, were not going down without a fight, and they were still alive despite how much he was trying to basically wipe them off the earth. And so he gets back to the room, he sees that Sheila's still alive, and completely emotionless, he had already emptied the rifle, so he goes back down to the kitchen, reloads that rifle one more time, and then goes back into that bedroom. He loaded that rifle with 1 more bullet, goes into that room, shoots Sheila in the brain, killing her instantly. A true psychopath. He then cleans up any traces of him being in the home, makes that phone call to his cottage to make it look as though his father had called him, and then he scurries back to his cottage down the road. Now, one of the key points of evidence in this new theory against Jeremy had to do with the silencer being on the gun. The silencer was not on the gun when police found the crime scene and found the weapon itself. It actually wasn't found until days later by a cousin of the family, and the silencer was tucked away in a cupboard. So whether that silencer was on the gun during the murders became a pivotal issue. And the prosecution maintained that the silencer had to have been on, and that's why not everybody was woken up immediately and why this scene was able to unfold the way it had. But he says that if the silencer were in fact on the gun like they believe, it would have been impossible for Sheila to kill herself because of how long that would have made the weapon, and given her height, her body, her fingers, her hands, it would have been impossible for her to shoot herself with that silencer on. And they also say that if she had shot everybody else with the silencer, but then said, okay, you know what, this isn't going to work, I need to take the silencer off to shoot myself, she would have taken it off and just lied it next to her body and shot herself, rather than going all the way downstairs, hiding the silencer in a cupboard, coming back upstairs into her mother's room, and then shooting herself. That didn't make sense at all. So now that forensic evidence is showing that Sheila could not have been the killer, it starts to make all of the questions become even more glaringly obvious. Because if she wasn't the killer, it meant that Jeremy had lied about that phone call from his father saying that Sheila went berserk with the gun. And it shows that he would have already known that a shooting was taking place and that they were dead because he was the killer himself. One of the big points of argument in the defense's case was, of course, Sheila's mental state. So they started questioning her doctors, her friends, her extended family, to see could she even truly be capable of a crime this heinous. And everybody said no. Sheila's psychiatrist took the stand and testified and said that her erratic mental state still would not have caused her to create this amount of violence, that it didn't align with what his views and opinions of her had been, and that he didn't see it as being plausible. He goes on to say that if she were that angry to kill somebody, she would not have killed her boys and her father as well, because her relationship that was most strained was with her mother. That is who she would have taken anything out on, any sort of anger. It wouldn't have been on her own children and on her father, who she had a great loving relationship with. And Sheila's ex-husband also testified and said the same. And he said, despite their long history and the episodes that he had encountered with her, she would absolutely never hurt her children. Never in a million years. Sheila's extended family also took the stand, her cousin and her aunt, and they said that Sheila not only was not a violent person, but that she didn't even know how to use a gun, so there was no way that this was possible. Ultimately, just a year later, in October of 1986, Jeremy was convicted of the 5 counts of murder. He was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison, but then was notified in 1994 that he would never be released. And despite trying to appeal, in 2002, the Court of Appeals upheld that verdict that he will not be released and he's not getting out. Jeremy continued to protest his innocence throughout this entire thing. He was adamant that he had nothing to do with this, that it was his sister, and he maintained his innocence, even though his extended family all believed that he was the one responsible. As Jeremy continued to protest his innocence, his lawyers filed all different motions, things about that sloppy crime scene, trying to really show that the crime scene wasn't even handled properly. There's also a ton of evidence that you guys didn't even file or take into account. There are so many different grounds for appeal that we have. They continue to say that the crime scene photos of the crime scene itself weren't even taken until weeks after the murder, that the time of death for Sheila was heavily miscalculated. They were really poking holes in everything they possibly could. But then this all boils down to motive. So what was the motive? What would drive somebody to slaughter their entire family in the dead of night in such a brutal way? Well, I'll tell you what it is, and I'm sure it's no surprise, and you guys are already saying it before I even tell you. Money. At the time of this brutal massacre, the family estate was said to have been worth £400,000, which today would equate to approximately £1.2 million or $1.5 million. So a pretty hefty amount of money. Now, because of this money and this motive, in the murder trial, the court heard what was really outlined in the parents' will, which made the idea that the motive was financially driven all the more clear. June and Neville had left their entire estate to be divided equally between Jeremy and Sheila. So obviously, if Sheila weren't in the picture, Jeremy gets everything. But it was also outlined that he would have to be working at the family farm in order to receive anything. But then the court heard from testimony from Jeremy's girlfriend, Julie's mother, that his mother, June, had confided in her, saying that she was going to bypass Jeremy and Sheila in her will entirely, and they were going to leave everything to the twin boys. So was this really a plot because his girlfriend told him, hey, my mom was talking to your mom and she's actually going to change the will and she's leaving the entire estate to your nephews, and he said, before she does that, I need to go after them. I need to kill everyone and I need to kill Sheila so that I get everything. Was that the motive? Because that seems pretty possible, in my opinion, that before any documents or any legal paperwork gets changed to where you no longer are going to get the right to this money, you're going to wipe everyone out to make sure that doesn't happen so that the current will stands true and that you get everything. It always comes down to greed, doesn't it? I swear, the two motives that I hear the most are always either because there's infidelity and they're too much of a coward to just get a divorce, so they decide to just kill their spouse, or it's money and it's financially driven. So it's either greed or infidelity. Why are those the two biggest motives out there for horrific crimes? It blows my mind. It's like either just get the courage to leave your spouse, or hi, get a freaking job and do something for yourself so you're not so damn greedy, feeling entitled to money that you didn't earn. Sorry, I'm clearly a little bit heated on this. So even today, Jeremy continues to campaign for his innocence. And there is an entire group out there who really truly does believe that he is innocent and not guilty in this. They believe that the investigation was not handled properly, that the evidence wasn't collected properly and stored accurately, and they truly believe that the wrong person has been convicted in this crime. There also is a lot of conversation that there is a lot of evidence that has not yet been brought to light in this case, and that when it is brought to light, it's going to change everybody's perception of what they think they know entirely. And I have to be honest, when I was researching this case, I had a couple of question marks as well. One of the main question marks for me was that in one of the crime scene photos taken after this brutal attack, there was something etched into the cabinet in the twin boys' room, who, remember, this was once upon a time Sheila's room. And it was a fresh etching, and someone had carved into that cabinet, "I hate this place." My first thought would be that it was Sheila, not the twins, but who knows? Maybe it was the twins, we don't know. Or could it really have been an older carving that they're not accurately depicting, and this was from when she occupied the room as a young child? It was little things like that, little different pieces of information that started to make me step back and wonder, okay, am I reading this right? Or is this really how it went down? There's a lot of different details like that, but again, you need to watch this docuseries to get all of that information and make the decision for yourself. Because there are so many details that I just couldn't simply cover in this one video. But if you watch that docuseries on HBO Max, you're going to get access to all of those, and you're really going to be able to form your own opinion and make your own judgment as to what you think happened. So I'm interested to hear what you think, not only based on this video, but once you watch the docuseries, come back and tell me, because like I mentioned, there is such a divide out there right now of people who believe the right person was held accountable, but who also then on the other side believe that it was a complete botched investigation and they have the wrong person. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's have a discussion. This was definitely a very interesting case to research, and I appreciate you guys taking your time to listen to it with me. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell to on so you get notified of new videos and upcoming live streams. And please like, comment, share this where you can. And lastly, if you want to be an official 10 to lifer with VIP exclusive access to different perks, one-on-one chats, 10 to life emojis, click that link in the description box below to join our exclusive membership community. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen with me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the coverage of today's case. Until the next one, stay safe. Bye.